She slipped, he ignored her, and her daughter laughed. Now she's sold the house that held their secrets. She walked away from her marriage, her daughter's cruelty, and a life built on silence. And she's not looking back, because sometimes the only way to reclaim your life is to let everyone rent their own karma. I used to think silence was safety, that if I just held my breath long enough, bent the edges of myself to fit into the outlines of mother, wife, good woman, I'd be loved the way I needed. But silence has a way of turning into rot. And eventually, it spills. My name is Caroline, and for 17 years I lived in a house on Sycamore Lane, nestled in the kind of suburban Ohio neighborhood where everyone waves but no one really sees. Our colonial-style home had white shutters, a porch swing that groaned under the weight of forgotten summers, and a mailbox that carried more bills than love. I raised a daughter there, Presley. She used to call me Mommy in a voice so high-pitched it melted my knees. Now, at 17, she calls me Caroline when she's angry. And she's angry often. Presley was born with a full head of jet black hair and lungs that didn't stop screaming until I held her against my chest. That was the last time I remember her needing me. Somewhere between her first steps and her first boyfriend, the warmth drained from her eyes. The sweet child who once begged me to braid her hair turned into a girl who walked past me like I was air. Not just invisible, irrelevant. She grew up watching her father, Robert, treat me like a decorative item in his well-curated life. A woman you consult for groceries or dry cleaning, not conversation. And she learned, not in the ways I'd hoped, not in how to love or care or build bridges, but in how to dismiss, minimize, and twist. Most mornings I cooked breakfast she didn't eat and packed lunches she threw out. She rolled her eyes at my sweaters, my voice, my mere existence. I learned to tiptoe around her moods, hoping maybe today she'd say something kind, or anything at all. But the real moment, the moment everything shifted, came on an icy Tuesday in February. It had snowed overnight, the thick, dense kind that muffled sound and made everything look like it belonged to someone else. I stepped out onto the front porch with a bag of trash in one hand and my phone in the other, checking the time. The steps were slick. I should have known. My boots skidded, and then I was airborne for a split second that lasted forever. When I hit the concrete, my hip cracked against the edge, and my head snapped back so fast I saw stars. The wind left my body in a gasp. The trash bag exploded beside me, coffee grounds, eggshells, yesterday's leftovers smeared across the driveway like shame. Pain came second. First came the cold, and then her laughter. I looked up. Through the front window, Presley stood with her phone in hand, grinning. Not startled, not rushing out to help, just watching, smiling, laughing. She didn't come out, not even after I lay there for a full minute trying to sit up. When I finally stumbled inside, wet and bruised, she looked up from her phone and said, "You're so dramatic." That was the moment something inside me broke. Not the kind of break you tape back together with therapy quotes and deep breaths. No, this was a rupture. A split between the version of me who tolerated and the version who refused to keep disappearing. I sat in the kitchen, ice pack on my elbow, my legs shaking. Robert didn't even ask what happened when he walked through the door that evening. Presley barely looked up from her screen. They had their own world, one I no longer belonged to. But as I sat there in the flickering kitchen light, surrounded by cold silence and my own humiliation, I made a decision so quiet it felt like prayer. Something has to change. Not them. Not the house. Me. And this time, I wasn't going to wait for permission. Robert wasn't always a stranger. He used to look at me like I held answers he hadn't yet found. But even then, there was a certain stillness in his gaze, like emotion was a language he never learned. We met at a 4th of July picnic when I was 22. I brought watermelon slices. He brought silence. And somehow, I mistook his reserve for stability. He proposed with a modest ring and an even more modest speech. It makes sense, doesn't it? And I said yes because I thought marriage was supposed to feel practical, sensible, predictable. I thought love was something you worked your way into, like a pair of stiff shoes. The house came later. A foreclosure we renovated with borrowed money and overreaching dreams. White siding, blue shutters, 3 bedrooms and a basement that always smelled like damp cardboard. It had character, I told myself. It had potential. But character can't mask the silence that crept into every room like mildew. Robert didn't yell, he didn't drink, he didn't cheat. He just omitted. Conversations, affections, apologies. They were luxuries never afforded in our home. I spent years trying to earn scraps of connection, performing emotional gymnastics to gain a nod, a glance, a thank you. But nothing ever broke through the glass wall he built around himself. Presley came 2 years in. She was the light that cracked through that glass. At first, she'd cry at night, and I'd rush in, singing lullabies off-key until she dozed. Robert never stirred. "Let her learn to self-soothe," he said, even when her cries sounded like a plea. I'd rock her until dawn, a quiet rebellion in the nursery shadows. For a while, she was mine, all mine. She'd reach for my hand, giggle into my chest, whisper secrets only toddlers understand. But as she grew, the air changed. She watched him, learned from him, picked up his silences, his clipped tones, his disdain for softness. She started echoing him in ways that felt like betrayal, but I knew weren't her fault. I remember the first time she rolled her eyes at me. She was 8. I had packed her lunch with a note that said, "You're my sunshine." She came home, threw the note on the counter, and said, "Don't do that again. It's embarrassing." Robert laughed. "She's growing up," he said. "Let her have some edge." But edge, I've come to learn, can cut deep when wielded without mercy. Our house began to mirror us. Paint flaked off the door frames like shedding skin. The upstairs bathroom door never closed right. The wallpaper in the dining room curled at the edges, revealing yellow glue and cracked plaster underneath. I tried to fix things, repainted, regrouted, bought candles that smelled like clean linens and summer rain. But you can't mask rot with lavender. In the mornings, I'd catch my reflection in the hallway mirror, half-lit, smeared, warped. Like the woman staring back wasn't fully formed, just the outline of someone who once mattered. I'd adjust my cardigan, brush back a strand of hair and think, is this what becoming invisible feels like? Presley stopped joining me for dinner around 13. She'd say she ate at school, or she wasn't hungry, or that my lasagna was too basic. I'd sit at the table with 2 full plates and 1 empty chair, pretending to enjoy the silence. Robert would read the paper, not even looking up when I cleared the dishes. The clatter of ceramic on ceramic was the only acknowledgement I ever got. I filled my time with busy work, organizing drawers, washing windows that didn't need cleaning, folding laundry with military precision, anything to justify my presence, anything to stay needed. But slowly, something in me began to rust. The woman who once dreamed of writing novels, who used to laugh until she snorted, who danced in the kitchen barefoot, she started shrinking, compressing herself into someone small, agreeable, forgettable. And they seemed to prefer me that way. It wasn't until the slip on the ice that I realized just how far gone I was. How they no longer saw me as a person, but as background noise. Furniture. In the days that followed, I stayed quiet, observing, listening, watching Presley flit around the house with her perfect eyeliner and her venom-laced sarcasm. Watching Robert retreat into his laptop, his scotch, his safe, emotionless detachment. And then I saw it. A coworker, one of the few who still engaged with me at the office, sent me a message. "Hey, is this you?" It was a link. I hesitated, clicked. There I was. On the driveway, flailing, falling, crumpling. The camera zoomed in. You could hear Presley giggling behind the screen. The caption read, "Boomer Icecapades #momfail." Thousands of views, hundreds of comments, laughing emojis, cruel jokes, a few people asking if I was okay, but they were buried under the avalanche of mockery. My throat closed. The room tilted. I don't remember standing, only that my hands were shaking as I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. My own daughter had filmed me, humiliated me, and posted it for the world to see. When I confronted her, she didn't flinch, didn't apologize, just said, "It was funny. Chill out." Robert didn't even look up from his phone. Something snapped then, not loudly, not theatrically, but the way old wood breaks, softly, finally, and with irreversible damage. I wasn't just unwanted. I was the punchline. And the house knew. Every creak of its floorboards, every shadow in the corners, every crooked nail in the baseboards felt like a whisper. Leave, leave, leave. But before I could go, I had to become someone worth saving again. I watched the video again that night. I shouldn't have, but I did. over and over, my body crumpling on repeat, frozen frame by frame like some grotesque art exhibit. Presley's laughter didn't fade with the replays. It grew louder in my head, taunting, relentless. I tried to tell myself it didn't mean anything, that she was just a teenager pushing boundaries, trying to be funny, not realizing the weight of what she'd done. But it was a lie, a comfort lie, the kind I'd been spoon-feeding myself for years. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open in front of me. Presley breezed in, backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds already in. She paused long enough to grab an energy bar from the counter. "Presley." My voice was low, controlled. She glanced up, annoyed by the interruption. "What?" I turned the screen toward her. The video was paused on my fall, my body mid-air like something out of a slapstick cartoon. My eyes locked on hers. Her expression didn't change. She didn't flinch, just blinked once and said, "Yeah, so?" "So?" I repeated, my voice cracked. "You filmed me, you posted it." She shrugged. "It was funny." "You humiliated me." She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "God, you're so sensitive. It's not that deep. People post that kind of stuff all the time." I felt like I was shrinking in front of her. She was taller than me now. She always had that height advantage. But the emotional gap, the moral one, was what stunned me. I wasn't standing across from a child. I was facing someone who had grown comfortable erasing me. Robert came in midway through the exchange, glanced at us, then walked past without saying a word. The door slammed behind him. Presley followed him out minutes later, not even bothering to close the door gently. I sat there in the echo of her exit, the stillness around me loud and suffocating. Word spread faster than I expected. Not because people cared, but because people love a scandal, especially a quiet, middle-aged one who's always seemed a little too tightly wound. My coworkers offered tight-lipped smiles. No one mentioned the video, but they all looked at me differently, like I'd been unwrapped, exposed. One afternoon at the grocery store, I heard two neighbors whispering near the dairy section. "Did you see what her daughter posted?" "Yeah, poor thing. But I mean, you never know what goes on behind closed doors." I didn't confront them. I just stood there, clutching a carton of eggs, feeling something old and shameful clawing at my throat. They didn't mean poor Presley. They meant poor me, as in pathetic. People didn't ask if I was okay. They just observed, from a distance, as if my humiliation might be contagious. At home, the walls closed in tighter. Every creak in the floorboards felt accusatory. The living room, once full of color and toys and movie nights, now felt like a museum of absence. Photos on the walls stared back at me. Presley in braces, Robert with his forced smile, me pretending I wasn't dying inside. There was a time, long ago, when this house rang with laughter. We used to throw summer parties, cheap wine, folding chairs on the lawn, citronella candles flickering in the dark. I used to make Robert laugh. I used to matter. But somewhere along the way, the joy faded, and the routine swallowed everything. The couch became his fortress. The kitchen became my prison. And Presley became the bridge we never built strong enough to hold the weight of our indifference. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching the backs of chairs, the corners of counters, as if grounding myself in the physical world might anchor the emotional one. And then came the mirror. There's one in the hallway between the master bedroom and Presley's room. Long, thin, full length. I used to catch my reflection there, rushing past in the mornings. But that day, I stopped. I looked at myself, really looked. My hair was thinning. My eyes looked bruised, hollow. My sweater hung from my shoulders like it didn't belong to me. I raised my hand to touch my cheek, and for a second I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked like my mother. The realization hit like a gut punch. My mother, Vivian, wasn't cruel in the obvious ways. She didn't hit. She didn't scream, but her silence could silence gods. She raised me on guilt and impossible standards. I grew up knowing her love was conditional, her approval rare, and her warmth rationed like wartime sugar. I swore I'd never be like her. Swore I'd raise Presley with softness, with openness, and yet here I was, watching my daughter become someone cold, someone manipulative, someone who thrived in the absence of compassion. And I knew, deep in my bones, that it started with me. Not because I wanted it, but because I had tolerated it, permitted it, because I had been taught to survive by disappearing, and I'd passed that survival down without meaning to. I sat on the floor in the hallway, back against the wall, knees pulled to my chest, and asked myself a question I hadn't dared to ask in years. Who am I outside of this family? Not a wife, not a mother, not an echo of the women who came before me, just me, Caroline. And the truth was, I didn't know, but maybe it was time to find out. Time does strange things when you live in a house full of silence. It stretches and bends, loses meaning. Days bleed into nights, weeks into months, and eventually you stop keeping track, because what is there to count when no one is talking? After the video, Presley barely looked at me unless it was to scoff or accuse. Her defiance matured into something darker, less teenage rebellion, more calculated disdain. She'd leave dishes in the sink as a statement, not an oversight. Slam doors like punctuation marks, laugh at messages on her phone, then glance at me to make sure I noticed that whatever amused her had nothing to do with me. Robert, when he was home, kept his eyes on the television or the stock market. "Teenagers act out," he said once, without looking up from his phone. "She'll grow out of it." I didn't bother explaining that this wasn't a phase. It was a pattern. Instead, I started writing. It began with scraps of paper stuffed into drawers, lists of things I wished I'd said, memories I couldn't shake, words that tasted too sharp to say aloud. Then I bought a notebook, leather-bound, blue. I wrote at night, mostly. After the lights dimmed, after Presley locked her door and Robert disappeared behind his. I wrote about who I used to be, who I missed being, who I might still become if I dared. And then, therapy. I didn't tell them. I booked the appointment on a Tuesday afternoon, told Robert I had errands. The office smelled like citrus and dust. My therapist, Dana, was soft-spoken but unflinching. In that room, I didn't have to apologize for needing something. I didn't have to edit myself into a more palatable version. I just spoke, and she listened. "You've been surviving," she said, during our third session. "But surviving isn't the same as living." I nodded, tears burning my throat. One day, I came home with a gallon of paint, soft gray-blue, the color of early morning. I didn't ask permission. I just cleared out the guest room, rolled up the old carpet, and started painting. Stroke by stroke, the old beige walls disappeared. The room smelled of new beginnings. It was mine, a sanctuary. I placed a chair by the window, bought a thrift store lamp, and lined the sill with books I hadn't dared to read in years. Virginia Woolf, Maya Angelou, Anne Lamott. Women who reminded me that my voice didn't have to vanish just because no one in my house was listening. Presley noticed the change immediately. She hovered at the doorway, arms folded, eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Repainting," I said without looking up. She snorted. "What for? No one even goes in there." "I do." She stared for a moment longer, then walked away, muttering something under her breath. That night, I found my new notebook missing. I never asked her about it. I didn't need to. After that, her mood shifted again. More volatile. She'd slam her backpack down on the counter, stomp through the house with practiced contempt, leave her laundry in piles outside my bedroom door like a warning. Still, I kept writing. I bought a new notebook and hid it well. I started taking the long way home from work. Detours through neighborhoods with colorful front doors and wind chimes that sang in the breeze. Sometimes I'd park by the lake, crack the window, and just sit there watching the light fade across the water. I played old songs on the radio. Fleetwood Mac, Tracy Chapman, Simon and Garfunkel. And for those few minutes, I belonged only to myself. One night, after another tense dinner where Presley sat in stony silence and Robert scrolled through his phone, I slipped out without a word. Drove with the windows down, the wind rushing through my hair, the night air biting and alive. I felt like I could breathe again. These were the moments I began to stitch myself back together, quietly, carefully. But healing is never linear. Sometimes it cuts deeper before it mends. One Saturday morning, Presley stormed out to meet friends. "Don't wait up," she snapped, and left her bedroom door ajar. Something about the angle of it, the way it creaked slightly open, unsettled me. I don't know what compelled me to walk in. Maybe it was the way she'd been watching me lately, like I was a chess piece she was positioning for a final move. Maybe it was intuition. Her room smelled of perfume and resentment, clothes spilled from drawers, makeup smeared across her vanity. I noticed a journal wedged between her mattress and bed frame. Red cover, frayed edges, no lock. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. And what I read gutted me. Page after page of hatred. Sharp, unfiltered venom. She's such a pathetic joke. Can't believe she still tries to talk to me like we're equals. Planning something. Can't say it here in case she ever finds this, but soon she'll regret everything. Sometimes I wish she'd just disappear. Everyone would be better off. I stood frozen, the pages trembling in my hands. I wasn't reading the mind of a teenager venting. I was reading the blueprint of someone who found joy in cruelty, who rehearsed manipulation, who relished in my pain. She hated me. Not just disliked or dismissed, hated. And I had no idea why. I put the journal back exactly where I found it, walked out, closed her door, locked myself in my sanctuary, and sat in the chair by the window for a long time, watching shadows move across the floor. The silence between us wasn't just a symptom anymore. It was a weapon. But now, I wasn't going to keep absorbing the damage. Something inside me shifted. No more surviving. Now, I would begin dismantling the life they built from my erasure. There's a kind of disappearance that happens without anyone noticing. Not the theatrical kind, not vanishing in a puff of smoke, but something slower, quieter. A mother stops being a person and becomes a function. A wife becomes an appliance, a fixture. A woman becomes a shadow in her own story. I'd been disappearing for years, but now I was learning how to disappear on purpose. Not to vanish, but to reappear somewhere else, as someone else, as myself. I started small. First, with information. I visited a lawyer downtown, an older woman named Sheila, whose voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. Her office smelled like strong coffee and determination. I sat across from her, hands clenched in my lap, voice trembling as I explained my situation in half-truths and nervous pauses. "I'm not ready to leave," I told her, "but I want to understand my options." She nodded once, no judgment in her eyes. "Knowledge is power," she said. "You don't have to use it right away, but you should have it." She explained property law, spousal rights, bank accounts, hidden assets. She handed me a checklist of documents to find: deeds, tax returns, account statements. I walked out with a folder tucked under my arm and a fire starting to flicker in my chest. I began looking at everything differently. Not through the lens of what it meant to preserve, but what it would take to walk away. I dug through file cabinets when Robert was out, quietly scanned papers late at night. I learned to read the fine print, to decode the numbers, to trace the map out of my own confinement. And he didn't notice. In fact, the less I responded to his questions, the fewer questions he asked. When I stopped refilling his coffee in the morning, he poured his own. When I stopped asking about his day, he didn't notice the silence. He was so used to my orbit revolving around him that he didn't see when I started pulling away. That told me everything. At the library, I checked out books on trauma. Not the clinical kind, though I read those too. But the human stories. Memoirs by women who escaped silence, who rebuilt themselves from ashes. I read in the corner of the second floor, under a flickering fluorescent light, a place that became my secret sanctuary. The librarians began to recognize me. One of them, a soft-eyed man named Drew, would sometimes ask, "Find what you needed today?" I'd nod and smile, more than I thought I would. It was in those pages I began to understand the patterns, not just Presley's cruelty, not just Robert's absence, but my own inheritance. My mother had taught me that a woman's worth was tied to how quietly she suffered, how much she could endure without asking for more, how invisible she could become without anyone asking why, but I wasn't willing to pass that legacy down any further. Presley's journal haunted me, her words repeated in my mind like static. Everyone would be better off if she disappeared. But instead of breaking me, they steeled me. I began to see her not just as a tormentor, but as a product of a home that taught emotional detachment as survival. That didn't absolve her, but it made me more certain. I had to end this cycle. I had to stop handing down damage as inheritance. One Saturday afternoon, I walked into a consignment boutique across town. It was quiet, tucked between a bookstore and a florist, the kind of place you wouldn't find unless you were looking for something specific. I wasn't looking for anything, but I found a red dress. It wasn't loud, no sequins or plunging neckline, just simple, tailored, elegant. The kind of dress that doesn't shout but doesn't whisper either. I stood in front of the mirror in the tiny changing room, hands smoothing the fabric against my sides. It had been years since I wore anything red. Too bold, too loud. My wardrobe was full of muted tones, beige, navy, soft grays, the color of apologies. But this dress made me feel visible again, like I had a pulse, like I still had stories to tell. I bought it without hesitation. At home, I didn't hang it in my closet. I left it out, draped over the back of a chair in my sanctuary room. Every time I passed by, I saw it. And every time it reminded me, you are still here. You are still becoming. Presley noticed it. One evening, she passed my room, glanced in, and stopped. "What's that for?" she asked, voice laced with suspicion. "Me," I said. She scoffed and walked off. But I smiled, because that moment, as small as it seemed, was mine, unapologetic, untouchable. These days I measured progress in things no one else saw, in the steady rhythm of my journal entries, in the way I stood taller when I walked into a room, in how I no longer rushed to explain myself. I was still in the house, still surrounded by the same walls, same people, same silence. But I was no longer theirs. I was learning the art of disappearing from their narrative so I could write my own. Selling a life doesn't start with the deed. It starts with the little things. The porcelain vase Robert's grandmother gave us for our wedding, gone. Sold at a vintage boutique for $40. The antique clock that once hung in the foyer, ticking like a metronome of quiet misery, posted on a local auction site. The crystal serving set I used every Thanksgiving, boxed, priced, claimed by a stranger in a black SUV. Robert didn't notice. He didn't ask where the vase went, or why the clock was missing. If he did register the difference, he tucked it away beneath the blanket of willful ignorance he'd mastered over the years. That suited me fine. His blindness gave me space to act. I began photographing the house with my phone when no one was home. Angles of the staircase, the shadow-streaked living room, the yard with its patchy grass and rusted swing set. Each picture felt like a page torn from a chapter I never wanted to reread. Then I contacted a real estate agent. I told her I was selling under personal circumstances, and she didn't press. The market was hot. The house, for all its cracks and ghost stories, had curb appeal. Within 3 days of the listing going live, quietly, discreetly, I had 3 serious offers, all above asking. I accepted the second one. The couple was newly married, expecting their first child, hopeful, innocent. They reminded me of who I used to be. I hoped they'd have better luck with the walls than I did. In the quiet moments that followed, I gave myself a farewell tour. The hallway where Presley took her first steps. The bathroom where I sobbed after she told me she hated me for the first time. The bedroom where Robert and I had stopped speaking except to coordinate schedules. Every room was scarred, not visibly, but deeply. In the dining room, the wallpaper curled a little more now, like it was tired of holding itself together. In the garage, I found an old art project Presley made in 3rd grade. Paper mache and glitter, her handwriting spelling out "Best Mom Ever." I held it for a long time before slipping it into the trash. Some things weren't worth salvaging. I didn't tell them about the sale until the final week. I waited until the paperwork was nearly done, until the boxes were packed in my sanctuary room, until I could see the finish line clearly enough not to flinch. Presley was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, texting with the rapid fire of a teenager trying to keep the world spinning around her. I stood in front of her and spoke clearly. "I sold the house." She looked up, confused. "What?" "I sold the house. We're moving out next week." Her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, we? You don't get to decide that." I didn't flinch. "Actually, I do. The deed is in my name." She dropped her phone on the counter with a thud. "Are you insane? I have school, my friends. You can't just... What the hell is wrong with you?" Robert came in during the tail end of her tantrum. I turned to him. "The house is sold. You'll need to find a new place." He blinked, stunned into actual expression. "You sold our house without even telling us?" I smiled, and it wasn't warm. "I figured you wouldn't notice. You haven't noticed anything else." Presley's rage curdled into something darker. Contempt. "You're just jealous that I have a life, that I matter. You're so bitter, it's pathetic." I stepped closer, calm, measured. "Presley, I hope someday you grow into someone capable of kindness, but I won't be around to see it. Find your own way. She stared at me like I'd slapped her, but there was no victory in my voice, no gloating, just truth. I walked out of the kitchen, left her standing there in her fury, and closed the door to my room for one of the last times. 3 days later, I got a call from the guidance counselor at Presley's school. She spoke carefully, diplomatically. I thought you should know. Presley's scholarship application to Northwestern has been denied. There's some concern over a video she posted. It's circulated widely. The admissions board found it concerning. It may be affecting her other applications as well. I thanked her and hung up. Presley found out that night. I heard her scream from upstairs, a guttural sound of disbelief and rage. She came down sobbing, hurling curses, demanding to know if I set her up, if I talked to someone, if I sabotaged her future. I didn't do this, I said evenly. You did. Actions have consequences. You laughed at someone's pain, made a joke of it. People saw that. She crumbled to the floor, real tears now. Not for me, not for remorse, but for the life she'd imagined that was suddenly slipping from her grasp. And I watched her, for a long moment, wanting to feel pity, wanting to feel anything maternal. But there was only a dull ache, and beneath it, an unshakable clarity. Sometimes you have to burn the house down, not out of anger, but because you finally see that the foundation is made of rot. I walked away. There was nothing left for me in that kitchen, or that house. A few days later, the moving truck pulled away, and with it, the last version of me who lived for everyone else. Presley didn't pack quietly. She slammed drawers, yanked hangers off rods, and flung shoes into suitcases, like each movement could wound me. Her eyes burned with betrayal, her mouth a machine gun of accusations. You ruined everything. I hate you. I'll never forgive you. I let it all come. Her rage was loud, but it didn't reach me. I stood in the hallway, watching her storm through what used to be her world, every slam of a dresser drawer a goodbye she didn't want to say. She didn't understand yet that anger is easier than grief. She was mourning something, even if she didn't know what. Control, entitlement, the illusion of permanence. Robert said nothing for most of that day. He walked from room to room with a blankness that surprised even me. Not panic, not anger, just disbelief. Like he was waking up from a long sleep and finding the landscape altered beyond recognition. He finally looked at me as Presley stormed down the stairs, dragging a suitcase that scraped against the walls. Where are we supposed to go? I sipped my tea calmly. Figure it out. There was no malice in my tone, just finality. I owed them nothing more. Presley shoved past him, muttering something about staying with a friend until she found someplace decent. Robert followed her out in silence. And then the house was mine, empty, echoing, for about 4 hours. The moving truck arrived just after noon. The driver, a kind woman named Maria, helped me load what little I chose to keep. My books, a few kitchen things, a rocking chair I once used to soothe a baby who no longer needed me. Everything else had been sold, donated, or discarded. The apartment was nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors that creaked with honesty, a kitchen just big enough to dance in if I felt like it. The walls were a pale yellow, soft and warm, like a late September morning. I moved in by dusk. That first night, I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just sat on the floor with a mug of tea and let the quiet settle around me. Not the oppressive kind I'd lived in for years, but the soft hush of nothing expected, nothing demanded. Peace, I realized, isn't loud. It's the absence of tension. It's waking up and not feeling the knot in your stomach. It's sipping coffee at dawn with no one else in the room, no voices ready to weaponize your words, no cold shoulders icing your presence. I started unpacking slowly. Each item had to earn its place. My books went on open shelves, lined in neat rows, some stacked sideways like miniature towers. My notebooks, now 3 volumes deep, found a home in a vintage trunk I repurposed as a coffee table. On the windowsill, I placed a tiny potted fern, green, growing, alive. I slept deeply that first night. No footsteps overhead, no slamming doors, no cold bedsheets cohabited with someone who'd long stopped seeing me. In the mornings, sunlight spilled through the windows, hitting the hardwood in ribbons. I began to notice the little things, how the breeze smelled different without the weight of that house, how my own breath came easier, when I wasn't waiting for someone to snap. I read again. Not just skimmed, read. I cooked for one. I listened to jazz and blues and songs I hadn't heard since I was young enough to believe in rescue. And then there was Bonnie. She lived across the hall. 73, widow. The first time we met, she knocked with a tin of oatmeal cookies and a warm smile that looked like it had known loss, but chose kindness anyway. "I saw you move in," she said. "Didn't want you thinking you're alone here." I invited her in. We sat for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Her late husband, my not quite divorce, her crocheting habit, my love for secondhand bookstores. She didn't pry, she didn't pity, she just listened. Bonnie had a gentle way of naming hard things without making them heavier. When I told her I'd sold the house and left behind a daughter who hated me, she nodded and said, "Sometimes freedom costs what you thought you couldn't live without." We became friends without ceremony. She brought me fresh herbs from her windowsill garden. I shared my blueberry scones. We watched old films on Sunday nights and traded dog-eared paperbacks. For the first time in years, someone looked at me and saw a woman. Not a failure, not a prop, not an inconvenience. Just Caroline. One morning, sitting at the window in my red dress, just because I realized something profound. I didn't miss them. Not Robert's indifference, not Presley's contempt, not the sterile rhythm of a life lived in fear of upsetting the balance. What I missed was the version of me that used to dream of joy. And now, here in this modest apartment with cold floors and empty rooms, I had finally found the space to meet her again. The letters started arriving 2 weeks after I moved. Presley had never been one for handwriting. Texts, voice notes, online posts, those were her weapons of choice. But now, thick envelopes bearing my name began appearing in my mailbox, addressed in looping cursive that felt almost performative. Each one reeked of rage disguised as sorrow. "You abandoned me. I needed you and you left. Everyone says I'm the one to blame, but it's your fault. You twisted everything." They were laced with half apologies and full accusations, carefully chosen words to provoke guilt, sentences that bent sympathy into daggers. At first, I read them all. Each one cracked something old inside me. Guilt, instinct, habit. I'd spent years trying to decode her moods, to fix what I hadn't broken, to mother someone who met affection with contempt. Now, these pages tried to pull me back into that storm. But I was no longer built for it. So I started burning them. One by one, I fed them to the ceramic bowl I used for incense. It sat on the windowsill in my sanctuary room, the flames low and clean. I'd watch the paper curl, the ink blur into smoke, and with each letter turned to ash, I felt lighter. I didn't respond. I didn't explain. Silence, I realized, can also be a boundary. Robert emailed me once, short, stiff, polite. Maybe we rushed into things. We could talk, for Presley's sake. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. There was no anger left in me for him, only clarity. He had never seen me, not really, and I had stopped trying to be visible in a mirror that refused to reflect me. I didn't need closure from him. I'd given that to myself the day I walked away. Instead, I turned toward something new. Bonnie, ever intuitive, showed up one Sunday with a flyer. Local Women's Writing Circle, Stories That Heal. She handed it to me like it was a passport. "You've got too many words locked up," she said. "Time to let some out." I went the following Thursday. The group met in the back of a cozy bookstore, chairs arranged in a rough circle beneath fairy lights and mismatched lamps. There were 6 of us, each carrying our own invisible bruises. Divorcees, widows, women who had survived cancer, abandonment, addiction, silence. We didn't write for applause. We wrote to reclaim our own narratives. My first piece was about a woman who forgot her name somewhere between the birth of her daughter and the first time her husband forgot her birthday. When I read it aloud, my hands shook. My voice wavered. But no one looked away. They listened. Fully. Like I mattered. It was more healing than any apology I'd never receive. I started writing daily. Not just in journals, but in stories. I changed names, bent truth into fiction, turned memory into metaphor. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I was telling the truth, even if only to myself. I wrote about the slip on the ice, about the sound of laughter that broke something sacred, about the red dress. And for the first time in years, I felt powerful. Through whispers at the group, Through Bonnie's occasional updates, I heard Presley had moved into a small rental across town, a dingy duplex near the highway, the kind of place where windows are thin and walls hold secrets. I didn't visit. I didn't call. She was old enough to live on her own, old enough to make choices and to face their consequences. One evening, Bonnie knocked softly. She held the day's newspaper, her face pinched with concern. "You should see this," she said, handing it to me. There, in the blotchy ink of the local news section, was a headline. "Local teen arrested in shoplifting incident. Social media history sparks controversy" below it. A photo of Presley. Not one she chose. Not one with perfect lighting and an arrogant smirk. Just a grainy, unflattering image. Her eyes red, her expression dazed. The article detailed her arrest at a boutique downtown. Attempted theft, confrontation with staff, resistance. They'd found footage of her past online, the video of me slipping, the cruel captions, and people remembered. They always do. The store pressed charges, not just for the theft, but because of her attitude. Her name was tainted, her record now stained. I set the paper down gently. I didn't cry. Not from spite, not from vengeance. Just a quiet ache, a mourning not of her downfall, but of everything that could have been different. There was still a photo of her in my new apartment, not on display, tucked inside a book of poetry. She was 9 in the picture, freckled, gap-toothed, hugging a stray cat she'd insisted on keeping for a week. That little girl was still somewhere inside her, but I couldn't dig her out. Only Presley could. And maybe she would. Maybe she wouldn't. But I had already chosen my peace, and I wasn't going back. Dana, my therapist, had a way of speaking that felt like being unwrapped, gently, patiently, but with intention. No sudden jerks, no forced realizations. Just soft truths delivered in doses I could finally hold. "She learned it from somewhere," Dana said one afternoon, after I told her about the article, the arrest, the headlines. "Children don't invent cruelty from scratch. They absorb what they see, what they feel." "But I didn't hurt her," I said. "Not the way she's hurt me." Dana tilted her head. "You didn't need to. You were hurt, and she learned how to survive by watching that." That stayed with me, longer than I wanted it to. I'd been so focused on what Presley had done to me that I hadn't considered what I'd done to her simply by staying where I was never seen, by teaching her, through inaction, that being a woman meant being small, absorbing damage, burying pain. She had inherited my wounds, twisted them into armor, sharpened them into blades. It didn't excuse her cruelty, but it explained the map. Still, understanding didn't undo the ache. Because now, more than ever, I knew what I had truly lost. Not a daughter, but the idea of one. The dream of motherhood I had carried since childhood. The soft focus image of a girl who would love me unconditionally, who would laugh in kitchens and whisper secrets on road trips and call me just because. That girl never existed. What I had was a daughter who made me bleed. And I had finally stopped trying to stop the bleeding just to prove I was still her mother. When Presley's court date arrived, I didn't go. The phone call from her temporary lawyer was brief. "You're listed as her next of kin. Will you be attending?" "No," I said. I expected guilt to follow, but it didn't. Only relief. I chose myself. Not out of cruelty, not out of pettiness, out of self-preservation. That night, I made dinner for one. Grilled salmon, roasted asparagus, a glass of wine I no longer drank in secret. I pulled an old playlist from my phone, songs I hadn't heard since my teens. Ones that once made me dream of road trips, college crushes, and summer wind in my hair. I turned the volume up, and I danced. Alone, barefoot in the middle of my apartment. Not gracefully, not like a movie scene, but wildly offbeat, a little ridiculous, arms flailing, hair undone, laughing at nothing. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to approve of me. I didn't need a witness. I didn't need to be needed. I was just there, alive, moving, free. Later, as the music faded and the evening quieted, I sat at my desk by the window, the light outside dimming to a soft blue-gray. I pulled out a fresh piece of paper and began writing a letter to Presley. Not one of anger, not even one of pain, just truth. "Dear Presley, There was a time I thought loving you meant saving you. Now I know loving you means stepping back and letting you walk the road you've chosen, even when it's filled with sharp stones. I hope you find your way. I hope you look back one day and see where the path forked. I hope you learn to be kind, not just to others, but to yourself. You are not irredeemable. You are not lost. But I cannot be the one who leads you back. Love, Mom. I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and tucked it inside my desk drawer. I never planned to send it. It wasn't for her. It was for me. For the version of me who still whispered at night. Was I enough? For the mother who tried everything and failed? For the woman who finally chose not to bleed for someone else's growth? The long mirror in my bedroom reflected me differently now. I no longer saw a ghost. I saw a woman learning to love her own company. I saw grief, yes, but not the kind that consumes, the kind that clears. Some wounds don't bleed. They calcify. I learned that in my mother's house. It wasn't a house of screaming. It was a house of silence, controlled smiles, measured affection. A place where crying was met with disapproval and vulnerability was considered shameful. We didn't talk about sadness. We ironed it, we folded it, we packed it into closets and hoped it wouldn't wrinkle again. My mother, Evelyn, was the kind of woman who believed being soft was being weak. She had rules instead of lullabies, expectations instead of tenderness. Fix your face, she'd say whenever I looked anything less than agreeable. No one likes a whiner. I learned early to keep my tears to myself, to smile in public and ache in private. I became the girl who said I'm fine so often, I forgot what not being fine felt like. That's what I inherited, not just from her, but from generations of women who learned silence as survival. And I passed it on. A few weeks after Presley's arrest, I drove north. I hadn't been back to my childhood town in over a decade. The streets looked smaller than I remembered, tight-lipped houses with tired shutters and sagging porches. The gas station was still there, the church with the cracked steeple, familiar ghosts in slightly faded form. The house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, white paint peeling, windows boarded. A foreclosure notice had once fluttered from the mailbox. Long gone now. It was abandoned. Hollow. I parked across the street and stared at it, my hands gripping the steering wheel. That house had seen my first skinned knee, my first lie. The night I got my period and didn't tell anyone because I was too ashamed. The time I failed my math test and my mother didn't speak to me for 2 days. The birthday she forgot. The hugs that never came unless company was over. I got out of the car. The yard was overgrown, weeds twisting through the cracked walkway. The porch sagged under the weight of neglect. I didn't try the door. It would have been wrong somehow, but I walked the perimeter, stopping at the window of what used to be my bedroom. Through the cloudy glass, I could just make out the faded remains of flowered wallpaper. I remembered sticking glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, pretending they were constellations, leading me somewhere else, somewhere better. I circled to the back of the house, drawn by some ache I didn't recognize. That's when I saw it. In the dirt beneath what used to be the garden bed, something stuck out. Warped cardboard sealed in a plastic bag. I knelt, curiosity overtaking hesitation, and gently pulled it free. Inside was an old photograph, a school picture. Me, 8 years old, pigtails, uneven bangs, smiling with too many teeth and not enough certainty. I held it carefully, brushing dirt from the plastic. That girl had already learned to hold her breath. I brought the photo home and tucked it into a frame on my writing desk, not prominently displayed, just quietly present. A reminder of who I was before the world asked me to disappear. That visit didn't erase the past, but it gave me permission to stop reliving it. As I drove away, I whispered a quiet truth to myself. We inherit pain, but we don't have to keep passing it on. I chose then, and every day since, not to. Back in my apartment, the rhythm of life resumed. Bonnie brought over fresh tomatoes from her windowsill garden. The writing group met on Thursdays. My stories grew bolder, less disguised. The women cheered me on. I laughed more. And then, one evening, I got a voicemail. The number wasn't saved, but I knew the voice instantly. Presley. Her voice was smaller than I remembered, measured, hesitant. Hi, Mom. I don't know if I should be calling. I don't know what you want from me, but I started therapy. Someone told me I should. I don't even know if it'll help. I'm not good at talking about things. I guess I've been awful. And I see that now. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know how to forgive myself yet. I just thought you should know." The message ended abruptly. No goodbye, no number left, just silence. I listened to it 3 times. Each time I felt something shift. Not hope, not quite, but a loosening. She was trying, maybe not for me, maybe not even with clarity, but she was trying. I didn't call her back, not yet. Some spaces need time to echo before they can hold a voice again. But I saved the voicemail, and I whispered into my apartment, into the long quiet that no longer frightened me. Let her find her way, just like I found mine.
Names are supposed to mean something. Caroline Evelyn Hart. It was a name that always felt borrowed. Caroline was too soft around the edges, Evelyn carried the weight of my mother's disapproval, and Hart, well, Robert's last name never really belonged to me. I wore it like a coat 2 sizes too big, never warm enough, never mine. After the voicemail, something settled in me. Not closure, not reconciliation, just the clarity of space. The knowledge that I had carved out something whole from a life that used to slice me into pieces. So I did something I hadn't done since I was 17. I picked up a form that asked me what name I wanted to carry, and this time, I chose. I filed the paperwork at the county clerk's office, handed over my driver's license, and wrote my new name at the bottom of the form with a hand that didn't shake. Calla Morgan. Calla, like the flower that thrives in silence, blooming tall from still waters. Morgan, a name that belonged to no man in my life, no family legacy, just a word I liked. Strong, grounded, unapologetic. When I received the official documents in the mail, I held them against my chest for a long moment. It wasn't just a name change, it was a reclamation, a rebirth. With my new name came a new beginning I hadn't planned for: publishing. It started with a single essay. I submitted a piece to a women's journal about invisible mothers, how we vanish inside our families, how our silence becomes a curse passed down through generations. I wrote about laughter as cruelty, about motherhood as a battlefield no one names. I didn't expect much, but it went viral. The email notifications started rolling in, thank you notes from strangers, confessions from women who felt seen for the first time, invitations to speak, to write more, to share. Bonnie printed the essay and framed it for me. "So you never forget," she said, tears bright in her eyes. "You did this." And then came the invitation to speak on a resilience panel, an event hosted by a local women's center. I hesitated, nervous. I'd never stood in front of a room full of people to tell the truth out loud, but I said yes. That night I stood on stage in a navy blouse and red lipstick, fingers curled around a microphone, and told 100 women what it meant to leave, to burn the house down without apology, to choose yourself after decades of vanishing. When I stepped off the stage, the applause followed like a benediction. Bonnie was waiting for me in the wings, her hands gripping mine. "You were brilliant," she whispered, voice thick. "Your mother would have never understood this moment, but I do." We cried, quietly, together, not from pain, from release. A week later, I bought myself a ring, not flashy, not a diamond, just a simple silver band, hand-forged with a twist in the middle, like a scar made beautiful. I slipped it on my finger and whispered to the empty room, "I belong to me now." No vows to anyone else, no promises built on expectations, just this truth: I was whole. That same day, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from Presley. This time, the letter was different. No accusations, no manipulation, just apology. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to say I'm sorry for everything. I was cruel. I was broken in ways I didn't understand. I blamed you for my own pain. I thought if I made you smaller, I wouldn't feel so powerless. You were always there and I never saw you. Not really. I hope someday I become someone who can make things right. I'm trying." I folded the letter slowly, sat with it in my lap for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't rush to respond. But that evening, I wrote her a short reply. "Presley, I received your letter. Thank you for your honesty. I'm glad you are seeking help. Healing is hard, but it's possible. I support your growth, even from afar. For now, I need to continue protecting the peace I've built. I hope one day we can speak again, not as mother and daughter, but as two women who have done the hard work of becoming. Be well. Kala. I signed it with my new name, because the woman who raised her no longer existed, and the woman who remained had no desire to return to the burning house she escaped.
It's strange, the way pain can become a blueprint. How love, once twisted and contorted through fear and silence, becomes something unrecognizable, something that harms in the name of holding on. I spent years trying to preserve what I thought was love. I clung to roles I didn't choose. I bent myself into shapes that fit their needs and forgot my own. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave, not to punish, not to escape, but to choose yourself when no one else will. The journey here wasn't clean, it was jagged, bloody in places. There were nights I ached for the version of my daughter that lived only in memory, for the echo of a marriage I'd once imagined. But ache isn't the same as regret. Regret lives in things we didn't do. And I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I let go. I let go of Robert's indifference, of the invisible wife I used to be. I let go of the house that swallowed me whole. I let go of Presley. Not the girl she was, but the idea of who she might have been, had life unfolded kinder. And in the letting go, I found something I never thought I would: hope. But not the loud, cinematic kind. Not the kind that comes with sweeping music and arms thrown open in reunion. My hope lives in solitude, in the silence I once feared, in the softness of a morning with no one else awake, the quiet joy of making coffee for one, the peaceful certainty that I am no longer someone's afterthought. Hope lives in the lines I write, in the women I meet at the writing circle who now call me friend, in Bonnie's gentle jokes, in the creak of my apartment floors that no longer sound like warning signs, but familiar footsteps. Presley lives far away now. I hear things, fragments through mutual acquaintances, the occasional update through Bonnie's well-meaning web of community connection. She's working part-time, still in therapy, still figuring herself out. I don't reach out. She hasn't written again, and that's okay. Healing doesn't require reunion, it requires truth. And the truth is this: I love her. Quietly, from afar, without ownership or obligation. She's renting her own karma now, living with the echoes she once threw at me like stones. I hope in time she learns how to lay them down, how to soften, how to heal. But that's her journey. Mine looks different. It looks like the bookstore on 9th Avenue, where I now volunteer once a week. A small independent shop with creaky floors and the scent of old paper and citrus oil. I organize shelves, recommend novels to strangers, and lose hours in the quiet rustle of pages. One afternoon, I walked in to find a display set up at the front, a stack of books, each one with a white cover and red lettering that caught the eye. The title, Daughters of Quiet Women. Below it, a handwritten sign, local author, Kala Morgan, signed, copies available. I paused. And then I heard it. A young woman across the aisle holding the book in her hands, reading aloud from the opening line. Some women disappear without a sound. Others burn quietly from the inside out. She turned to her friend. Have you read her? She's raw. It's like she's telling your story without even knowing you. Her friend nodded. She's not afraid to be honest. I didn't interrupt. I didn't introduce myself. I just stood there for a moment, letting it all settle in. They knew me now, not as someone's mother, not as someone's wife, but as a woman who told the truth and survived it, and that was enough. Later that night, I walked home in the quiet, the city humming softly beneath me. The wind tugged at my coat, and my ring, simple silver mine, caught the light from a passing storefront. Inside my apartment, I brewed chamomile tea, pulled a blanket around my shoulders, and sat at my desk. Outside, the sky folded into a deep blue, stars just beginning to bloom. I looked at the photo of the girl I used to be, the one I'd found behind my childhood home, her smile uncertain, her eyes asking questions no one ever answered. I found us, I whispered to her, and she smiled back. In the end, there was no grand reconciliation, no thunderous climax, just a woman who learned to speak, to walk away, to choose herself. And as I closed my journal for the night, I thought of how far I'd come, of the driveway, of the laughter that broke something sacred, of the silence that followed, and I wrote my final line. I slipped, yes, but I landed in my own life. If this story stirred something in you, an ache, a memory, a quiet me too, then you already know. Silence breaks us, but truth rebuilds. Stay connected for more stories that speak what too many keep hidden. Because sometimes, the most radical thing a woman can do is tell the truth out loud. Subscribe to join a circle where survival isn't the end, it's the beginning.